Hello, guys, and welcome to the week number 5 of our course of Anglo-Saxon literature. Hope everything is going well on your side. My best wishes for you guys. Well, as usual, I'm going to start the class sharing with you a poem. This time, it is a poem by the French poet Charles Baudelaire, and it is called Les promesses d'un visage, las promesas de un rostro. J'aime aux pâles beautés très sociles surbaisées, du semblant couleur de ténèbres, tes yeux, quoique très noirs, m'inspirent des penseurs qui ne sont pas du tout funèbres. Tes yeux, qui sont d'accord avec tes noirs cheveux, avec ta crinière élastique. Tes yeux, languissement me disent, si tu veux, amant de la mousse plastique, suivre l'espoir comme toi nous avons excité, et tous les goûts que tu professes, tu pourras constater notre véracité, depuis les nombrils jusqu'aux fesses. Tu trouveras au bout de deux beaux seins bien lourds, deux larges médailles de bronze, et sous un ventre uni, dur comme de velours, bistré comme la peau d'un bronze, un riche poisson qui, vraiment, est la sœur de cette énorme chevelure, souple et frisée, et qui t'égale en épaisseur. Nuits en étoiles, nuit obscure. Las promesas de un rostro. Amo, oh belleza pálida, tus cejas rebajadas de donde fluyen las tinieblas. Tus ojos que, aunque negros, pensamientos me inspiran que no son por completo fúnebres. Tus ojos que combinan con tus cabellos negros y con tu elástica melena. Tus ojos, si tú quieres, lánguidamente dicen, amante de la musa plástica, secundar la esperanza que en ti hemos excitado. Y los gustos que tú profesas bien podrás comprobar nuestra veracidad desde el ombligo hasta las nalgas. Encontrarás al borde de dos pesados senos dos anchas medallas de bronce, y bajo un vientre pietro, cual terciopelo suave, oscuro cual la piel de un bonzo. Una rica madeja que en verdad es la hermana de esta grandiosa cabellera, suelta y rizada y que te iguala en espesor. Noche sin astros, noche oscura. I particularly like this poem because of the topic that it manages and the words that it uses, right? I know that you're taking French, so you might be familiar with some of the words that are mentioned here, but even though, like studying French, it might be a little bit difficult to get some of the words. Then I read it in Spanish, and in Spanish is not necessarily clearer. Probably you require to listen to it again or read it again in order to get certain things. Well, this guy is talking about a woman, certainly, right? And basically he's doing a tour from his head until her pubis, right? And it's interesting how can you manage a topic that can be sexual with such, let's say, subtlety, right? And well, he's going down from her eyebrows, sorry, and her hair and her breasts until he arrives into her pubic hair, and basically he compares the color and the texture and everything else. And I don't know if you were aware of that, right? Like when I was reading it, but well, that's the whole point of the poem. And basically this is a way to exalt the beauty of such a woman. The terms are so delicate or so well chosen that basically you go through a mixture of words and not necessarily like notice this on the first reading. The other thing is that well, we know that Baudelaire was all the time hanging out with drunk people, with prostitutes, with homeless guys. Well, because that is sort of the environment that he surrounded with. And most likely, well, we cannot be completely sure, no? But most likely this poem was written to a prostitute. And well, it requires a certain level of culture in order to get it, so I'm not sure if the girl was able to understand it somehow. But that's the beauty of it, at least for me, like how a topic that can be a little bit sordid and explicit can be managed using very exquisite words. Well, guys, we're going to be advancing into the next topic, into the next period, in that you will find on the slide number 87. That is the British colonialism. Now, it's interesting that this is actually a period that was happening at the same time than the British Renaissance, right? It was happening simultaneously. So, well, in the British Isles, we had Shakespeare and the Elizabethan period that we practiced enough until the last session. Well, this was happening on the other side of the world in America, and this is very important because this is the first time that America, the territory that we know nowadays as the United States, enters the picture, right? Like so far, everything had been concentrated on the UK, or the territory of the Celts, of the Anglo-Saxons, eventually of the Norman invaders. So this is going to be the first time that we're going to talk about this. Important that we start by the name, British colonialism, right? So what is colonialism? What is a colony, right? So think about that, and think about the preconceptions that you have about it. Normally, the process of colonialism is when we have an empire or a powerful country or a powerful region that travels to some other territory, some other geographical location, in order to appropriate from that land and from those resources, right? This appropriation is usually violent, right? Normally you invade it and somehow using the force, either your armies, your soldiers, your war machines, etc. So you're able to invade and appropriate from this territory. Now, additional to it is, let's say, the expansion of your country. So every new land that you conquer for your territory is not going to have an identity anymore, or let's say is not going to have an autonomous control, but it will be an extension of your territory, right? So in Spanish colonialism, when people came from Spain and arrived here into Central America, South America, well, they were not independent countries anymore. No, they were extensions of the Spanish crown. So exactly the same happened with any process of colonialism. We can say that depending on the circumstances, sometimes we have resistance of the locals. Sometimes there are like wars. Sometimes after a few skirmishes and let's say resistance, well, people just accept this new regime. Sometimes from the very beginning, let's say that these territories consider that it's positive or convenient somehow, at least for some people, to accept this new, let's say, owners or lords that will eventually rule over the territory, right? So this is colonialism in a nutshell. Of course, there are a lot of other implications in there, such as depending on the level of flexibility, let's say these colonialists force people to adopt their customs, yes, their religion, their cultures, their language, or in some other cases they were flexible enough and they will say, okay, you're part of my territory, but you can continue praying to your gods, and you can continue, let's say, celebrating your parties, celebrating your festivals. You can continue using your language. Sometimes there was this middle point in which there was a mixture of the different religions of the locals with the religions of the colonialists and etc. Right? So there are like different combinations in there, but that is the most general idea. Now, why do you think that Britain became so powerful in terms of colonialism? If we take a look at languages right now, well, you know that because of the amount of people, Chinese is one of the languages that are more spoken around the world, including also Spanish. But then for a long time, English was one of the most spoken languages around the world. So why is it that Britain was so powerful? Think about that, right? We're talking about 16th century, more or less, and it extended for a long time until the 18th or even the late 20th century. We have this somehow process that continued to expand the territory of the UK. Well, the answer is quite simple, right? And it's because the UK, or let's say Britain, remember that we're talking about the equivalent territory of nowadays, no? Back then, it used to have different names or different limits or frontiers, right? So back then, Britain had one of the most, had the most powerful naval fleet. Yes, they have the potency of ships, of boats. They had the possibility of not only using boats and ships, but manufacturing them, and that gave them control over a lot of territories, right? Let's say that back then it was the fastest way to travel, right? We didn't have cars, we didn't have airplanes, so the boat was the fastest way to travel. Also, it was, let's say, in a way comfortable, because you could travel to a different place, taking a lot of different people in the same boat, you know, a big crew, and also having enough provisions. And then when you arrive to that place, you could load the boat with also raw materials, with possessions, with jewels, with anything that you can imagine that you can find in a foreign country, right? So commercially, this helped a lot, like being able to travel to different lands and exchange products and get to know new languages and be in contact with new people, and somehow having the advantage over communication, right? Because I mean, it seems like a month or 2 months to take one message from one place to another. Well, nowadays that's ridiculous, right? But back then, well, it was pretty quick. Like I mean, the alternative was spending a year or 6 months, or more or less, walking or going on a horse, or definitely if you were separated by sea, well, it was completely impossible, right? So this produced wealth, produced money that was being able to be accumulated, and that was used for new enterprises, for new, let's say, adventures in terms of colonizing other lands. And of course, there was the military power. No, they also had a really powerful military fleet, and when it was necessary, they were able to use that as in a violent way. Additional to that, well, of course, it's a little bit more recent, but eventually it became part of the colonialism as well. The English crown, the British crown, decided to pay pirates. Yes, they basically employed these criminals in order to attack only rival boats. Yes, so for example, there was a big history of Spanish boats and ships that were destroyed, that were ransacked, that were stolen or robbed for pirates, yes, by pirates. And these pirates were paid somehow they had a salary, and even some of them were made lords, right? And the salary that was paid for them was, came from the British Crown. We have the example of Sir Francis Drake, for example. There was a guy who didn't even know how to read or write and was a cold-blooded killer, and nevertheless he was sired, right? He was given this title of Sir by the British Crown. Here comes the history of how Cartagena, for example, is a walled city in order to repel or to reject the very constant attacks of pirates. And most of these pirates or corsairs were paid by the British Crown. So let's say that is the most general explanation of British colonialism. Of course, every new country, every new land that was attached to the British map, it provided a huge amount of natural resources, of raw materials, of riches, of all these different things. So if you see as a little bit of an statistics over here, it says that in the 16th century, English speakers were about 5 or 7 million, and most of them were concentrated on the British Isles. Nevertheless, over the next 350 years, that is relatively a short amount of time, this increased almost 50-fold, right? Like it means 50 times is 5 and 7 millions, and more or less 80% of the concentrations of English speakers was outside of Britain, right? So for 350 years, this is really a really quick change, guys. It's something that happened from one day to the next. Now, if you take a look at the slide of the in the slide number 88, you will see how it was possible for the British Empire to manage all these territories, right? At some point, at least let's say that the Britain Empire had territories in all the continents, right? And that was something amazing. They were able to control a big part of the world for a long time. Additional to this obvious desire for resources, for money, for new territories that will represent eventually more riches, that will represent more power and more people to control. Well, there was also this colonial mentality somehow that proposed that extending the English language throughout the world was an altruistic thing. Yes, something good, something desirable. It was like taking my civilized culture to those poor savages of the other countries, right? Some other countries or lands that were undeveloped, that were backwards sometimes, and let's say that didn't have had the opportunity to be in touch of somehow this progress, if we want to call it that way. So there were also these sort of idealistic people, not only the ones who were trying to rob and steal and kill and maim, but also, one or another that every now and then had this twisted desire to civilize people somehow, to bring in some semblance of order to these chaotic regions, that somehow were perceived as that if they were controlled by the empire, they would be better, right? So that is one side of the coin. Of course, there were other people, among the locals who were colonized, that were more than happy to be colonized. Yes, let's say that they were happy to be in contact with other people for commercial ends, because normally when there is an invasion, There's always a local who can be the betrayer, who can be the facilitator of this transition, and in the end he will have an important position. He can become some sort of a governor or a mayor or a really important entrepreneur or something like that. So we have this. Then among the folk people, there's the regular inhabitants. Well, among them, of course, there were also people interested in this, and basically Nietzsche creates this predisposition. Take a look, for example, at Cuba, the example of Cuba. Ideologically, Cuba and the United States have always been enemies in terms of capitalism versus socialism, and we have this missile crisis, and we had these attempted murders to Fidel Castro when he was alive, and well, so they are at odds all the time. They are antagonists. Nevertheless, you go to Cuba and you will find a lot of people who speaks English, right? Why is that? Why would you like to learn the language of your enemy, right? I am of course exaggerating a little bit. No, like this animosity has diminished a little bit with the years, and not everybody feels it, of course. But well, why would you learn to speak the language of your enemy? Well, because it is profitable, right? Like you can take advantage of tourism when people go over there, and you're able to talk to them. So you can earn some money, make some trades, and that will be it, right? So exactly the same thing happened back then, right? Somehow we have these traders who trade on different items, who were happy to guide other people for cartographic reasons, for commercial reasons, as long as they have some sort of gain, right? So it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. No, there are combinations of different factors that in the end, no matter if the colonialism is a really aggressive process, it turns out being somehow accepted at a certain level. Now, so remember that the point was to like take the language and the culture and this civilization to these new colonies, but sometimes inevitably there was like a two-way process. No, like I bring English, but then I adapt some of this, or I take something from your local language. So let's take a look at two important colonies in this colonialist period. So, for example, Australia was colonized by the British. If you take a look at the flag of Australia, well, you will find that over there's a resemblance to the Union Jack, right? The British Union Jack. So from there we have different things. Now we have the word boomerang, for example, right, or kangaroo, right? That were somehow local expressions or local words that were pretty specific, right? From India, for example, we have words such as pajamas, or bungalow, or jungle, or bangle, or shampoo, or candy, right? Those are different words that were somehow inherited or adapted or adopted from these colonies. Well, that was at a very general level, guys. So in the next video we will discuss specifically about certain things that happen in the territory of the United States, what is known right now as the United States, and some of the words and some of the linguistic features and certain things that happened back then. So let's leave this introductory video until here, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye bye. Hacks.